Scrum body of knowledge. In our introduction to the SBOC guide, we covered an overview of Scrum as a framework, the purpose, how it's used, the framework of Scrum, and how it differs from other traditional project management methods. Now that we have quite a bit of information about Scrum, it's time to share the ground rules governing Scrum as a framework. These ground rules are the Scrum Principles. And the Scrum Principles are the foundation on which the Scrum framework is based. The principles of Scrum can be applied to any type of project or organization. They must be followed in order to ensure an appropriate and successful application of Scrum. Within the scope of these principles, the aspects and processes of Scrum can still be modified to meet the requirements of a specific project or of the organization using them. The Scrum principles themselves, however, are non-negotiable and must be applied as described in a guide to the Scrum body of knowledge or the SBOC guide. Keeping the principles intact and using them appropriately gives those using Scrum confidence in the framework's ability to help them attain their project's objectives. The principles are considered the core guidelines for applying the Scrum framework. According to the definition in the SBOC guide, the principles are applicable to portfolios, programs, and projects in any industry, projects of any size or complexity, products, services, and any other desired results to be delivered to stakeholders. In applying these principles, it's helpful to remember how the SBOC guide defines the term product. The term product can refer to a product, service, or other deliverable. The Scrum principles are as scalable as Scrum itself. The scalability of Scrum is that it can be applied effectively to any project in any industry, be it small projects with teams of 6 members or large, complex projects with up to several hundred team members. The 6 Scrum principles include the following. Empirical process control, in which many decisions are made based on observation and experimentation rather than on detailed and predictive upfront planning. Self-organization, which implies that team members have the authority and responsibility to figure out ways to convert the prioritized product backlog into finished products without the intervention of stakeholders outside of the Scrum team. Collaboration, in which product development is a shared value creation process that needs all stakeholders working and interacting together to deliver the greatest value. Value-based prioritization, in which the highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of maximum business value. Time boxing, in which time is considered a primary constraint and many Scrum processes and activities are allotted a fixed amount of time. And iterative development, in which all work is divided into units that can produce a potentially shippable deliverable. Each of these will be developed in more detail in the next sessions. And this wraps up our introduction to Scrum principles. I look forward to seeing you in the next session, in which we'll study what the SBOC guide says about empirical process control. Until then, thank you for learning with us. Welcome back to Module 2, Scrum Principles. In this session, we'll see how decisions are made in Scrum and what the 3 main characteristics of empirical process control are. In Scrum, decisions are based on observation and experimentation rather than on detailed upfront planning. Empirical process control relies on 3 main ideas of transparency, inspection, and adaptation. We'll now discuss the 3 main ideas of empirical process control with the help of a few diagrams. Let's start with the first idea, transparency. Transparency allows all facets of any Scrum process to be observed by anyone. This promotes an easy and transparent flow of information throughout the organization and creates an open work culture. In Scrum, transparency is provided by openly sharing the project vision statement, which can be viewed by all stakeholders and the Scrum team. The prioritized product backlog with user stories that can be viewed by everyone, both inside and outside the team. The release planning schedule, which may be coordinated across multiple Scrum teams. Information radiators, such as the Scrum board and burn down charts, which make a team's progress clearly visible to all. and by daily stand-up meetings conducted during the Conduct Daily Stand-Up process, in which all team members report what they've done the previous day, what they plan to do today, and any problems preventing them from completing their tasks in the current sprint. The next characteristic of empirical process control is inspection. Let's have a look at the displayed diagram which summarizes the concept of inspection in Scrum. Scrum provides a point of inspection with the use of a common Scrum board and other information radiators which show the progress of the Scrum team on completing the tasks in the current sprint. The collection of feedback from the customer and other stakeholders during the Develop Epics, Create Prioritize Product Backlog, and Conduct Release Planning processes give additional opportunities for inspection. The final point of inspection comes during the review meeting, when the team seeks approval of the deliverables by the product owner and the customer in the Demonstrate and Validate Sprint process. The third main characteristic of empirical process control is adaptation. Let's take a look at the displayed diagram that summarizes the concept of adaptation in Scrum. Adaptation happens as the Scrum core team and stakeholders learn through transparency and inspection and then adapt by making improvements in the work they're doing. Some examples of adaptation include the following. In daily stand-up meetings, Scrum team members openly discuss impediments to completing their tasks. After the meeting, the Scrum Master coordinates help from other team members. More experienced members in the Scrum team also mentor those with relatively less experience and knowledge of the project or technology. When the needed resource doesn't reside within the team, the Scrum Master will acquire it externally. Risk identification is performed and iterated throughout the project. Identified risks become inputs to several Scrum processes, including Create Prioritize Product Backlog, Groom Prioritize Product Backlog, and Create Sprint Backlog. Improvements can also result in change requests, which are discussed and approved during the Develop Epics, Create Prioritize Product Backlog, and Groom Prioritize Product Backlog processes. The Scrum Guidance Body interacts with Scrum team members during the Create User Stories, Estimate Tasks, Create Deliverables, and Groom Prioritize Product Backlog processes to offer guidance and also provide expertise as required for the team to adapt to necessary changes and challenges. In the Retrospect Sprint process, agreed actionable improvements are determined based on the outputs from the Demonstrate and Validate Sprint process. These adaptations are integrated into later sprints and projects. And in the Retrospect project meeting, participants document lessons learned and perform reviews looking for opportunities to improve processes and address inefficiencies. Embedded within these processes, practices, and activities of Scrum are numerous opportunities for adapting to changing requirements and business realities. Here's an example of such a challenge faced in waterfall project management style. How the customer explained it, how the project leaders understood it, how the engineers designed it, how construction built it, how the business consultant described it, how the project was documented, what was operational, how the customer was billed, how it was supported, and what the customer really needed. Since it's a sequential approach, incorrect inputs at initial stages translates to unsatisfactory outputs towards the final delivery. With other methods, such as the traditional waterfall model, considerable planning needs to be done in advance of actual production. And the customer generally doesn't review product components until near the end of a phase or the end of the entire project. This method often presents huge risks to the project's success because the effect of each risk may be amplified through its impact on several developmental processes and thereby may have more potential for significantly impacting project delivery and customer acceptance. The customer's interpretation and understanding of the finished product may be very different from what was actually understood and produced by the team. And this may not be known until very late in the project's development. The displayed figure demonstrates an example of these challenges. Thank you for learning with us. Hello, and welcome back to Scrum Study. In the last video, you learned about the first principle governing Scrum, empirical process control. In this segment, we'll be exclusively talking about the second principle, self-organization. Scrum supports the idea that employees are self-motivated and that they seek to accept greater responsibility. So they deliver much greater value when self-organized. Have you heard of servant leadership? This is exactly what we prefer to have in Scrum-controlled projects. The preferred leadership style in Scrum is servant leadership, which emphasizes achieving results by focusing on the needs of the Scrum team. Moreover, self-organization doesn't mean that team members are allowed to act in any manner they want to. Rather, it means that once the product vision is defined in the Create Project Vision process, the product owner, Scrum Master, and Scrum team get identified. Also, the Scrum core team itself works very closely with relevant stakeholders for refining requirements as they go through the develop epics and create user stories processes. Team expertise is used to assess the inputs needed to execute the planned work of the project. This judgment and expertise are applied to all technical and management aspects of the project during the Create Deliverables process. Although prioritization is primarily done by the product owner who represents the voice of the customer, the self-organized Scrum team is involved in task breakdown and estimation during the identify tasks and estimate tasks processes. During these processes, each team member is responsible for determining what he or she will be doing. During a sprint, if team members need any help completing their tasks, they announce these needs during the daily stand-up meetings. The Scrum team itself interacts with other teams through the Scrum of Scrums, or SOS meetings, and can look for additional guidance as required from the Scrum guidance body. Finally, the Scrum team and Scrum Master work closely to demonstrate the product increment created during the sprint in the demonstrate and validate sprint process, where properly completed deliverables are accepted. Since the deliverables are potentially shippable, and the prioritized product backlog is prioritized by user stories in the order of value created by them, the product owner and the customer can clearly visualize and articulate the value being created after every sprint. And Scrum teams, in turn, have the satisfaction of seeing their hard work being accepted by the customer and other stakeholders. Now let's take a closer look at the chief goals of self-organizing teams. They understand the project vision and why the project delivers value to the organization. They estimate user stories during the Estimate User Stories process and assign tasks to themselves during the Create Sprint Backlog process. They identify tasks independently during the Identify task process. They apply and leverage their expertise from being a cross-functional team to work on the tasks during the Create Deliverable process. They deliver tangible results that are accepted by the customer and other stakeholders during the Demonstrate and Validate sprint process. They resolve individual problems together by addressing them during daily stand-up meetings. They clarify any discrepancies or doubts and remain open to learning new things. They upgrade knowledge and skill on a continuous basis through regular interactions within the team. And they maintain stability of team members throughout the duration of the project by not changing out team members unless it's unavoidable. To clarify more on this, here we have a diagram depicting the goals of a self-organizing team. In contrast to the traditional command and control style of management, Scrum supports the idea that today's workers have much more knowledge to offer than just their technical expertise, and they can deliver greater value when they're self-organized. And with that, we conclude yet another session on the Scrum principles. I hope this session has informed you on the Scrum principle of self-organization. I look forward to seeing you in the next segment on another Scrum principle. Thanks for watching. Hello and welcome to Module 2, Principles of Scrum. In this session, we'll discuss an important concept, collaboration in Scrum. Collaboration refers to the Scrum core team working together and interfacing with the stakeholders to create and validate the deliverables of the project to meet the goals outlined in the project vision. It's important to note the difference between cooperation and collaboration here. Cooperation occurs when the worked product consists of the sum of the work efforts of various people on a team. Collaboration occurs when a team works together to play off each other's inputs to produce something greater. There are three core dimensions of collaborative work. Let's look at them one by one. The first core dimension is awareness. It essentially means that individuals working together need to be aware of each other's work. The next dimension is articulation. Collaborating individuals must divide work into units, distribute those units among team members, and then, after the work is done, reintegrate the units into a cohesive whole. The last core dimension is appropriation, which refers to adapting technology to one's own situation. The technology may be used in a manner completely different than expected by the designers. Now that we have an understanding of collaboration and its core dimensions, let's consider the key benefits of collaboration in Scrum projects. The Agile Manifesto stresses customer collaboration over contract negotiation. Thus, the Scrum framework adopts an approach in which the Scrum core team members, the product owner, Scrum Master, and Scrum team, collaborate with each other and the stakeholders to create the deliverables that provide the greatest possible value to the customer. This collaboration occurs throughout the project. Collaboration ensures that the following benefits are realized. The need for bringing about changes due to poorly clarified requirements is minimized. For example, during the Create Project Vision, Develop Epics, and Create Prioritize Product Backlog processes, the product owner collaborates with stakeholders to create the project vision, epics, and prioritize product backlog, respectively. This will ensure that there's clarity among Scrum core team members on the work that's required to complete the project. The Scrum team collaborates continuously with the product owner and stakeholders through a transparent prioritized product backlog to create the project deliverables. The processes conduct daily stand-up, groom prioritized product backlog, and retrospect sprint provide scope to the Scrum core team members to discuss what's been done and collaborate on what needs to be done. Thus, the number of change requests from the customer and rework is minimized. The second benefit is that risks are identified and dealt with efficiently. For example, risks to the project are identified and assessed in the Develop Epics, Create Deliverables, and Conduct Daily Stand-Up processes by the Scrum core team members. The Scrum meeting tools such as the Daily Stand-Up meeting, Sprint, Planning meeting, Prioritize Product Backlog Review meeting, and so on provide opportunities to the team to not only identify and assess risks, but also to implement risk responses to high priority risks. A third benefit is that the true potential of the team is realized. For example, conducting the daily stand-up process provides scope for the Scrum team to collaborate and understand the strengths and weaknesses of its members. If a team member has missed a task deadline, the Scrum team members align themselves collaboratively to complete the task and meet the targets agreed to for completing the sprint. A fourth benefit is that continuous improvement is ensured through lessons learned in collaboration. For example, the Scrum team uses the retrospect sprint process to identify what went well and what didn't go well in the previous sprint. This provides opportunity to the Scrum Master to work with the team and rework and improve the team for the next scheduled sprint. This will also ensure that collaboration is even more effective in the next sprint. Pause this video if you wish to study the displayed diagram. It provides an illustration of the benefits of collaboration in Scrum projects. We'll now consider the importance of co-location in collaboration. For many of the Scrum practices, high bandwidth communication is required. To enable this, it's preferred that team members are co-located. Co-location allows both formal and informal interactions between team members. This provides the advantage of having team members always at hand for coordination, problem solving, and learning. One of the key benefits of co-location is that it allows questions to get answered quickly. Another benefit is that problems are fixed on the spot. With co-location, less friction occurs between interactions. In collaborative, co-located teams, trust is gained and given more quickly. There are collaboration tools that can be used for co-located or distributed items. For co-located teams, those working in the same office, a preferred collaboration tool is face-to-face communications. Co-located teams can also use decision rooms or war rooms, scrum boards, wall displays, shared tables, and so on. Although co-located teams are preferred, at times the Scrum team may be distributed due to outsourcing, offshoring, work-from-home options, and so forth. From distributed teams, some tools that could be used for effective collaboration include video conferencing, instant messaging, chats, social media, shared screens, and software tools which simulate the functionality of Scrum boards, wall displays, and so on. And with that, we conclude this session on the Scrum principle of collaboration. I look forward to seeing you in the next session on the Scrum principle of value-based prioritization. Thank you for learning with us. Now that you have a clear understanding of the Scrum principle of collaboration, I'm going to discuss another important concept called value-based prioritization. The Scrum framework is driven by the goal of delivering maximum business value in a minimum time span. One of the most effective tools for delivering the greatest value in the shortest amount of time is prioritization. Prioritizing can be defined as determining the order and demarcating between what must be done now and what needs to be done later. The concept of prioritization isn't new to project management. The traditional waterfall model of project management proposes using multiple task prioritization tools. Is prioritization an integral concept in Scrum? From the project manager's point of view, prioritization is integral because certain tasks must be accomplished first to expedite the development process and achieve the project goals. Some of the traditional techniques of task prioritization include setting deadlines for delegated tasks and using prioritization matrices. Now I'll take you through another crucial concept, value-based prioritization. Scrum, however, uses value-based prioritization as one of the core principles that drives the structure and functionality of the entire Scrum framework. This concept helps projects benefit through adaptability and iterative development of the product or service. More significantly, Scrum aims at delivering a valuable product or service to the customer on an early and continuous basis. So who handles prioritization? The product owner prioritizes user stories in the prioritized product backlog. The prioritized product backlog contains a list of all the requirements needed to bring the project to fruition. Once the product owner has received the business requirements from the customer and written these down in the form of workable user stories, he or she works with the customer and sponsor to understand which business requirements provide maximum business value. The product owner must understand what the customer wants and values in order to arrange the prioritized product backlog items or the user stories by relative importance. Sometimes a customer may insist that all user stories are of high priority. While this might be true, even a list of high priority user stories should be prioritized within the list itself. Prioritizing a backlog involves determining how critical each user story is. High value requirements are identified and moved to the top of the prioritized product backlog. The processes in which the principle of value-based prioritization is put into practice are create prioritized product backlog and groom prioritized product backlog. The product owner's work doesn't end here. He or she simultaneously works with the Scrum team to understand the project risks and uncertainty, as they may have negative consequences associated with them. This should be taken into account while prioritizing user stories on a value-based approach. Refer to the risk chapter for more information on this. The Scrum team also alerts the product owner of any dependencies that arise out of implementation. These dependencies must be taken into account during prioritization. Prioritization may be based on a subjective estimate of the projected business value or profitability, or it can be based on results and analysis of the market using tools including, but not limited to, customer interviews, surveys, and financial models and analytical techniques. The product owner has to translate the inputs and needs of the project stakeholders to create the prioritized product backlog. That way, while prioritizing the user stories in the prioritized product backlog, 3 factors are considered: value, risk or uncertainty, and dependencies. Thus, prioritization results in deliverables that satisfy the requirements of the customer with the objective of delivering the maximum business value in the least amount of time. And with that, we conclude this session on the Scrum principle of value-based prioritization. I look forward to seeing you in the next session on the Scrum principle of time boxing. Thank you for learning with us.
Hello, and welcome back to our Scrum Study course on a guide to the Scrum body of knowledge. We have just finished learning about the value-based prioritization as a Scrum principle. In this section, we're going to learn what time boxing is and why it is so critical to the Scrum methodology. Scrum treats time as one of the most important constraints in managing a project. To address the constraints of time, Scrum uses a concept called time boxing, in which a certain amount of time is allocated for each process and activity in a Scrum project. This ensures that Scrum team members do not self-align too much or too little work for a particular period of time and do not expend their time and energy on work for which they have little clarity. Some of the advantages of time boxing are efficient development process, less overheads, high velocity for teams. Time boxing is utilized in many Scrum processes. For example, in the Conduct Daily Stand-Up process, the duration of the daily stand-up meeting is time-boxed to 15 minutes. This gives everyone just enough time to give 3 pieces of critical information and no more. What have I done since the last meeting? What do I plan to do before the next meeting? And what impediments or obstacles, if any, am I currently facing? If a team knows they should be offering this and only this information, then the meeting is unlikely to run longer due to time-draining digressions. Time boxing is also useful in avoiding excess improvement or gold plating of an item. One note of caution. Arbitrary time boxing can lead to demotivation of the team and may have the consequence of creating an apprehensive environment, so it should be used appropriately. Let's look more specifically at how time boxing is applied in Scrum. First, a sprint is a time-boxed iteration lasting 1 to 6 weeks, during which the Scrum Master guides, facilitates, and shields the Scrum team from both internal and external impediments. This aids in avoiding vision creep that could affect the sprint goal. During this time, the team works to convert the requirements in the prioritized product backlog into shippable product functionalities. To get maximum benefits from a Scrum project, it is always recommended to keep the sprint time box to 4 weeks, unless there are projects with very stable requirements, where sprints can extend up to 6 weeks. Second, the daily stand-up meeting, which is time boxed to 15 minutes. The team members gather to report the progress of the project by answering the following 3 questions. What have I done since the last meeting? What do I plan to do before the next meeting? And what impediments or obstacles, if any, am I currently facing? This meeting is carried out by the team as part of the Conduct Daily Stand-Up process. Next is a sprint planning meeting. This meeting is conducted prior to the sprint as part of the plan and estimate phase. It is time-boxed to 8 hours for a 1-month sprint. The sprint planning meeting is divided into 2 parts. Objective definition. During the first half of the meeting, the product owner explains the highest priority user stories or requirements in the prioritized product backlog to the Scrum team. The Scrum team, in collaboration with the product owner, then defines the sprint goal. Task estimation. During the second half of the meeting, the Scrum team decides how to complete the selected prioritized product backlog items to fulfill the sprint goal. In this context, sprint planning meetings are also conducted during the Identify Task process to identify tasks and during Estimate Task process to estimate identified tasks. While the sprint planning meeting is conducted before the sprint review meeting is conducted after the sprint. It is time-boxed to 4 hours for a 1-month sprint. During the sprint review meeting that is conducted in the Demonstrate and Validate sprint process, the Scrum team presents the deliverables of the current sprint to the product owner. The product owner reviews the product or product increment against the agreed-upon acceptance criteria and either accepts or rejects the completed user stories. Retrospect Sprint Meeting. The retrospect sprint meeting is time-boxed to 4 hours for a 1-month sprint and is conducted as part of the retrospect sprint process. During this meeting, the Scrum team gets together to review and reflect on the previous sprint in terms of the processes followed, tools employed, collaboration and communication mechanisms, and other aspects relevant to the project. The team discusses what went well during the previous sprint and what did not go well, the goal being to learn and make improvements in the sprints that follow. Some improvement opportunities or best practices from this meeting could also be updated as part of the Scrum Guidance Body documents. This brings us to the end of our session on the Scrum Principles of Timeboxing, and thank you for learning with us.
Hello and welcome to Scrum Study. In the last video, we saw the 5th principle governing the Scrum methodology, time boxing. This session will introduce you to the 6th Scrum principle, which is iterative development. So let's get started. What does iteration mean? Well, an iteration is the repeating of a process with the aim of approaching the desired goal, target, or result. Each repetition of the process is also called an iteration, and the result of one iteration are used as a starting point for the next iteration. Going by this, the Scrum framework is driven by the goal of delivering maximum business value in a minimum time span. To achieve this practically, Scrum supports the iterative development of deliverables. In most complex projects, the customer may not be able to define very concrete requirements or is not confident of how the end product may look. This is where the iterative model comes to the rescue. It's more flexible in ensuring that any change requested by the customer can be included as part of the project. How is it done? Well, user stories may have to be written constantly throughout the duration of the project. In the initial stages of writing, most user stories are high-level functionalities. These user stories are known as epics. Epics are usually too large for teams to complete in a single sprint. Therefore, they're broken down into smaller user stories. Moving on, each complex aspect of the project is broken down through progressive elaboration during the Scrum prioritized product backlog process. The Create User Stories and the Estimate User Stories and Commit User Stories processes are used to add new requirements to the prioritized product backlog. Next, the product owner pitches in. So let's look at what that role entails. The product owner's task is to ensure increased ROI by focusing on value and its continuous delivery with each sprint. The product owner should have a thorough understanding of the project's business justification and the value the project is supposed to deliver, as he or she drafts the prioritized product backlog and thereby decides what deliverables and values are delivered in each sprint. Then they identify tasks, estimate tasks, and create sprint backlog processes produce the sprint backlog, which the team uses to create the deliverables. Moreover, In each sprint, the Create Deliverables process is used to deliver the sprint's outputs. Next, let's consider the Scrum Master's role. The Scrum Master has to ensure that the Scrum processes are followed. He or she facilitates the team to work in the most productive manner possible. Finally, the Scrum team self-organizes and aims to create the sprint deliverables from the user stories in the sprint backlog. In large projects, various cross-functional teams work in parallel across sprints, delivering potentially shippable solutions at the end of each sprint. After the sprint is completed, the product owner accepts or rejects the deliverables based on the acceptance criteria in the Demonstrate and Validate sprint process. To clarify, here we have an illustration depicting how Scrum projects are completed in an iterative manner and how they deliver value throughout the life cycle of the project. So what's the benefit of applying this Scrum principle to the project? The benefit of iterative development is that it allows for course correction as all the people involved get better understanding of what needs to be delivered as part of the project and incorporates these learnings in an iterative manner. Thus, the time and effort required to reach the final endpoint is greatly reduced, and the team produces deliverables that are better suited to the final business environment. And with that, we conclude yet another session on the Scrum principles. I hope this session was informative and suggestive of the Scrum principle, iterative development. I look forward to seeing you in the next segment on another Scrum principle. Thanks for watching. Hello and welcome back to Scrum Study. So far, we've discussed the 6 principles that guide Scrum. Have you ever wondered why Scrum is becoming more popular with every passing day? Well, in many ways, Scrum is better than the traditional project management methods. Let's consider in detail some of these differences between Scrum and traditional project management models. The main difference is the way in which projects are handled. The emphasis in traditional project management is to conduct detailed upfront planning for the project with emphasis on fixing the scope, cost, and schedule and managing those parameters. Traditional project management may at times lead to a situation where the plan has succeeded, yet the customer isn't satisfied. Scrum encourages data-based iterative decisions over the detailed upfront planning practiced in traditional waterfall-style project management. The focus isn't on meeting the project plan's targets, but on satisfying customer requirements. Traditional project management can lead to a situation where the plan has succeeded, yet the customer isn't satisfied. In addition to iterative planning and delivery, Scrum supports the collaboration of all parties involved, be it the customer, business team, or technical team, to minimize risk and achieve satisfaction. Scrum is often contrasted with the other linear fashion project methods because of the low upfront planning and scheduling of activities that are followed by execution. The Scrum framework is founded on the belief that the knowledge workers of today can offer much more than just their technical expertise, and that trying to fully map out and plan for an ever-changing environment isn't efficient. Therefore, Scrum encourages data-based, iterative decision-making. In Scrum, the primary focus is on delivering products that satisfy customer requirements in small, iterative, shippable increments. To deliver the greatest amount of value in the shortest amount of time, Scrum promotes prioritization and time boxing over fixing the scope, cost, and schedule of a project. An important feature of Scrum is self-organization, which allows the individuals who are actually doing the work to estimate and take ownership of tasks. We can conclude this segment by saying that all in all, Scrum is an updated theory for managing any type of project, suited to our time and age, ready to replace the traditional project management techniques that were created in and for a bygone era. And with that, we come to the end of this session on Scrum versus traditional project management methods. And this marks the end of our module on the principles of Scrum as presented in A Guide to the Scrum Body of Knowledge. We at Scrum Study look forward to seeing you in more of our informational videos. Until